The story of why the Knights Templar were so much better at fighting begins not on the battlefield, but in the silence of their vows. Picture a world drenched in dust and blood, the Crusades. Europe's nobility answered the Pope's call to reclaim Jerusalem. But what came was chaos, mercenaries, zealots, and fortune-seekers all fighting under the same holy banner. Amid this disorder rose a group of men who swore to renounce wealth, lust, and even personal glory. They became something different, a brotherhood forged, not in greed, but in discipline. This foundation would make them one of the most lethal fighting forces of their age. When Hugues de Payens and his companions founded the Order of the Temple in 1119, they were puny knights pledging their swords to protect Christian pilgrims, journeying through the treacherous roads of the Levant. But their strength wasn't in numbers, it was in conviction. They bound themselves to a strict code that turned warriors into ascetics of war. They ate together in silence. They owned nothing. They obeyed instantly. Every strike, every charge, every prayer, they did as one. This was their first weapon, unity. The typical European knight of the 12th century was a nobleman trained for individual valor, duels, tournaments, personal honor. But the Templars rejected that. They did not fight for their own name. Their discipline stripped them of ego. In battle, they fought in tight, calculated formations. Their lines did not break. Where other armies dissolved into chaos once the charge began, the Templars maintained formation like a living wall of steel. Each knight was trained to hold his ground until ordered otherwise. In a world where fear ruled men's hearts, the Templars learned to master it. Their training was relentless. Unlike the feudal armies that fought only during campaigning seasons, the Templars were full-time soldiers. Day after day, they drilled on horseback, charging, withdrawing, reforming. Their horses' powerful destriers were trained to respond to leg pressure in minimal reins, allowing knights to wield weapons freely. Even their mounts were considered sacred assets, sworn companions. Every Templar horse bore the same discipline as its rider. Together, they moved as a single organism, swift, silent, unstoppable. But the real strength of the Templars came from their structure. Their hierarchy was military, not noble. Every brother, regardless of birth, obeyed the same rule. The Grand Master could sit beside a common-born sergeant, both bound by obedience to the temple rule, written under papal authority. This merit-based system allowed efficiency unknown in feudal armies dominated by aristocratic pride. Orders were obeyed instantly. Tactics were executed with precision. Their motto, non nobis, domini, non nobis, sed nomini te da gloriam, not unto us, O Lord, but unto thy name give glory, was more than a prayer. It was their operational code. As their reputation spread, the Templars became the armored fist of Christendom. They fought in the scorching deserts of Palestine, where heat, thirst, and exhaustion could kill a man before the sword did. Yet they endured. Their armor was lighter than that of European knights, designed for mobility in hot climates. Beneath the mail hauberk, they wore padded gambesons that absorbed both sweat and shock. Their iconic white mantle with the crimson cross symbolized purity and sacrifice. Reminder that their battle was not for conquest, but for God. Every day began and ended with prayer. Between sunrise and sunset, they trained, repaired weapons, cared for horses, and drilled tactics. They practiced charging in wedges, forming shields around vulnerable positions, and maintaining formation even in chaos. Each maneuver was timed, measured, and executed as if choreographed. No knight fought alone. Their combat philosophy was built on collective strength over individual glory, a revolutionary concept in a world obsessed with chivalric vanity. Imagine the clash at Hattin, clouds of dust rising, arrows hissing through the air, the sun burning the armor until it scorched the flesh beneath. Yet through that haze, you would see the Templars' lines unbroken, banners raised high, riding into the storm without hesitation. They didn't charge recklessly. They advanced with terrifying purpose. Behind their eyes was not fury, but faith. They believed death was not defeat, but ascension. That single belief made them unbreakable. When other armies saw defeat, the Templars saw martyrdom. Their faith was not blind. It was trained, hardened through years of ritual and discipline. Each Templar was expected to memorize prayers for every act of war before mounting, before drawing his sword, even before striking a fatal blow. Warfare was sacred liturgy. Their discipline went beyond physical. It was spiritual conditioning. A knight who fought without fear of death could face overwhelming odds and not falter. That is what their enemies feared most, the calm resolve of men who believed God himself rode beside them. The Templars also innovated in logistics, which made them efficient beyond compare. Their castles like Crac des Chevaliers and the Temple Mount, headquarters in Jerusalem, were military fortresses and administrative hubs. Within their walls, blacksmiths, engineers, and strategists worked in harmony. Supplies were cataloged, armories maintained. Their resources came from a vast international network across Europe and the Middle East, allowing them to replenish faster than any feudal lord could dream. When an army of Templars marched, it was self-sustaining, organized, and well-equipped. No other order had such reach or coordination, but their true edge was psychological. To the Muslim warriors they faced, The Templars were not mere soldiers, they were fanatics, wrapped in steel, unyielding, even when surrounded. Chroniclers from both sides of the Crusades recorded how Templar knights would fight until the last man, refusing ransom or retreat. Captured Templars often chose death rather than conversion. This unwavering resolve made them both respected and feared across the Islamic world. Even Saladin, the legendary Sultan of Egypt and Syria, is said to have admired their courage, though he knew their ferocity could not be allowed to thrive unchecked. The bond between Templars was deeper than brotherhood, it was sacred fraternity. They ate the same food, wore the same clothes, and were forbidden to even touch women or own gold. They shared everything, including pain and death. When a Templar fell, his brothers retrieved his body at all costs. No knight was ever left behind. That unity transcended earthly loyalty, it was loyalty forged in divine purpose. And when 100 men fight as one soul, their strength multiplies beyond counting. They were also innovators in battlefield communication. While other armies relied on the chaos of horns and shouts, the Templars used banners and disciplined formations. A trumpet call wasn't an invitation to charge. It was a command, executed with precision timing. Their commanders rode through the ranks before battle, reminding them of their vows, reciting psalms, and invoking divine protection. By the time swords clashed, every knight was mentally and spiritually aligned, a singular machine of destruction, powered by faith. Their mastery of both mind and muscle made the Templars almost unbeatable. At the Battle of Montgizard in 1177, just 80 Templars joined King Baldwin IV of Jerusalem to face Saladin's massive army, thousands strong. Against impossible odds, the Templars charged, cutting through the enemy ranks and driving them into chaos. The victory stunned the Islamic world and cemented the Templars' reputation as the finest soldiers of Christendom. They weren't just brave, they were strategically lethal. Every charge was calculated, every retreat pre-planned. It wasn't madness that drove them into hopeless battles. It was tactical faith. Their rise wasn't only due to their martial prowess, it was also the world's response to chaos. In an age when bandits, rival lords, and endless wars plagued Europe, people needed something incorruptible. The Templars became that ideal. They weren't just defenders of pilgrims. They were symbols of divine order. Through their rigid discipline and military success, they represented something greater than mortal armyists, the possibility of purity through war. That myth made them unstoppable both on the field and in the minds of men, but beneath the holy aura, their transformation had begun. The order that once fought only for faith began to attract wealth, power, and influence. Kings owed them debts. Nobles donated lands. Their coffers swelled and their reach extended from Jerusalem to Paris. Yet at this stage of their story, when their blades still gleamed under the desert sun, they remained pure instruments of war. Their simplicity was their strength, their discipline, their salvation. Every time they rode into battle, it was not just for victory, but for eternal redemption. The Templars' power came from something no ordinary army could replicate. Belief turned into method. They turned spirituality into strategy, prayer into practice, and obedience into weaponry. In a world divided by greed and chaos, they found unity in submission to God, to order, to each other. That was why they were better. Not stronger, not faster, better. That their enemies fought for land. The Templars fought for eternity. The story of the Knights Templars' supremacy in battle did not end with their courage or faith alone. It evolved into something far more intricate, something almost mechanical. By the mid-12th century, they had transformed from a handful of warrior monks into a vast international military order, running like a machine built on devotion and precision. The Templars were no longer merely knights, they were an empire of war, discipline, and divine calculation. To understand why they were so much better at fighting, one must see how the temple itself became both monastery and military academy, bank and barracks, pulpit and fortress. They were the first to merge religion and warfare into an organized institution, effectively creating what modern historians might call a military corporation. From their headquarters on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, they devised a system that stretched across continents. Europe became their recruitment ground. The Holy Land became their testing field. Every recruit went through a strict selection process that weeded out weakness both of body and soul. A man could not simply buy his way into the order. He had to prove his faith, his endurance, and his willingness to die without hesitation. A Templar's life began with ritual humiliation. Upon joining, he would kneel before his brothers and declare that he renounced the world, the riches of his family, the comfort of women, and the vanity of his own name. His hair was cut short, his sword blessed, and his armor replaced with a simple white mantle marked with the Red Cross. From that day forward, he ceased to exist as an individual. He was reborn as a part of the temple, a cell in the living body of the order, and within that body, every cell functioned toward one purpose: war in the name of God. Training was relentless. Every morning began before dawn, with prayer echoing through stone halls lit by flickering lamps. The brothers ate in silence, the only sound being the clatter of wooden bowls and the whisper of chainmail. After prayer came practice riding, sparring, weapon drills, formation, marching. They trained with lances, swords, maces, and bows, repeating movements until muscle and faith fused into instinct. When they weren't training, they repaired armor, sharpened blades, and studied strategy. The temple rule demanded constant readiness. There were no idle hours, no wasted days. A Templar who failed in discipline faced punishment, not with gold fines or words, but with physical penance. Unlike ordinary feudal knights, whose loyalty was often divided between lords and personal ambition, Templars had no families, no estates, and no heirs. Their inheritance was their sword. That single-minded dedication gave them something their enemies could not understand: freedom from fear. Death, to a Templar, was not the end. It was reward. That belief made them near impossible to intimidate. When an enemy faced a Templar formation, they weren't facing men. They were facing conviction shaped into steel. But their advantage went beyond ideology, was logistical genius. The Templars built one of the most sophisticated supply networks in medieval history. Across Europe, they owned farms, vineyards, and entire towns. These weren't symbols of wealth, they were lifelines of war. Every bushel of grain, every blacksmith's hammer, every horse's bridle was accounted for and funneled toward the Holy Land through the Order's intricate chain of command. A Templar army could march for months without famine or shortage because their economy was as disciplined as their sword arms. Even their battle tactics reflected this efficiency. A Templar formation moved with precision, each rank knowing its role. The first charge was always the heaviest cavalry knights, armored from head to toe, charging in tight wedges that split enemy lines like a blade through cloth. Behind them followed the sergeants, lighter troops who maintained the attack's momentum. Archers and crossbowmen supported from the flanks, while squires tended to the wounded and replaced fallen knights. It was a seamless dance of death, each movement rehearsed through years of training. The Templars also excelled in fortress warfare. Their castles were not mere strongholds, they were engineering marvels. Crack-day chevaliers in modern-day Syria stood as one of the greatest examples of their mastery. Double walls, hidden wells, arrow slits designed for maximum kill range, and round towers that deflected siege weapons. It was a masterpiece of medieval defense. Within such fortresses, the Templars could hold off armies many times their size. They didn't just build castles, they built systems of survival. Even the way they managed communication was centuries ahead of its time. Messengers, known as riders of the temple, carried sealed orders across thousands of miles. From the deserts of the Levant to the vineyards of France, these routes were protected by the Order's network of safe houses, ensuring that no message was lost, no plan was delayed. In a time when kingdoms struggled to communicate across borders, the Templars could mobilize forces from across Europe within months to their enemies. This level of organization was frightening. How could mere monks coordinate armies like an empire? The answer lay in their unity. Each Templar saw himself as a single thread in God's tapestry, his life insignificant except as part of the whole. The result was an army without ego. No knight questioned orders, no sergeant abandoned formation, no soldier fled the field. This unwavering obedience created something the medieval world had rarely seen: a disciplined military brotherhood that functioned like a machine of faith. But the Templars' mastery of war wasn't born from bloodlust. It was shaped by necessity. The Holy Land was a crucible where faith met death daily. They faced not only battle, but heat, hunger, and disease. The Islamic armies they fought were seasoned, intelligent, and commanded by brilliant leaders like Saladin and Nur ad-Din, who understood both strategy and patience. Against such adversaries, the Templars couldn't rely on brute force. They adapted. They learned from their foes, studying tactics of desert warfare, cavalry movement, and siege techniques. Over decades, the Templars evolved into hybrid warriors. European discipline fused with Eastern adaptability. Their use of combined arms, tactics, cavalry supported by infantry and archers became a hallmark of their strategy. In a world where most knights charged headlong into battle driven by personal honor, the Templars waited, calculated, and struck with mathematical precision. They used terrain, timing, and formation to turn smaller numbers into overwhelming victories. Chronicles describe them forming a spearhead charge so tightly packed that it seemed like a single armored beast tearing through the enemy lines. When a Templar commander gave the order to charge, there was no hesitation. Trumpets sounded once, banners rose, and like a thunderclap from heaven, the knights surged forward in unison. It wasn't chaos, it was ritual. Each movement synchronized, each man trusting the one beside him completely. That faith both in God and in each other was what made them unbeatable. They were not invincible, of course. The Templars suffered defeats at Hattin, Le Forby, and others, but even in loss, they earned. Chroniclers noted that no Templar ever turned his back on the enemy. When surrounded, they formed circles, fighting shoulder to shoulder until the last man fell. Such scenes burned into legend. Their courage wasn't merely physical, it was psychological warfare. Their enemies came to dread the sight of the white mantles. Rumors spread that the Templars did not feel pain, that they did not bleed like normal men. Even superstition became part of their weaponry. Inside their command structure, discipline was absolute. The Grand Master held supreme authority, but even he was bound by the rule of the temple. Beneath him were the seneschal, the marshal, and the commanders of regional houses. Every rank had defined duties. Decisions were collective, made through councils rather than whims. This early form of military bureaucracy ensured consistency across continents. A Templar army in Spain fought the same way as one in Jerusalem. Their code transcended geography, it was universal law, and that code extended even to their enemies. The Templars were feared, but they were not lawless. The rule forbade them from pillaging or harming civilians. They fought only when ordered. They treated prisoners with stern mercy, often offering conversions rather than executions. This moral discipline, rare in the brutality of the Crusades, earned them grudging respect, even among their foes. Saladin himself spared captured Templars on occasion, calling them men of iron faith. Their spiritual life was equally intense. Each evening, after drills and duties, they gathered in prayer. Their chaplains read from the Psalms, voices echoing through stone halls that smelled of oil, metal, and dust. They confessed their sins, sought forgiveness, and slept in dormitories with their swords at hand. Even in sleep, they were ready. The sound of a trumpet in the night could wake an entire garrison, armored and mounted within minutes. This constant vigilance was part of their identity, the eternal readiness for both battle and judgment. By the 13th century, the Templars had reached their zenith. Their network spanned from Portugal to Jerusalem, from England to Egypt. Their reputation was mythic, their influence political. Kings sought their loans, popes blessed their crusades, and commoners whispered their names in awe. Yet, amid this power, the purity that once defined them began to fade. The world that once revered them now envied them. But that is a story for another time. For now, at their peak, they stood unmatched. They had mastered the art of fighting through a fusion of faith, organization, and innovation. They turned devotion into discipline, poverty into power, and unity into dominance. No other order before or since has replicated their blend of spiritual intensity and military precision. To be a Templar was to live and die for something greater than the self, to become both monk and weapon, bound not by flesh, but by divine command. They were the storm that never yielded, the wall that never cracked, the brothers who fought not for kings or crowns, but for a kingdom not of this world. By the dawn of the 14th century, the Knights Templar stood at the pinnacle of their power. Their white mantles had become symbols of unshakable faith and military excellence. From the hills of Jerusalem to the forests of France, their fortresses stood as monuments to discipline and divine order. But what made them so much better at fighting faith, unity, and independence would become the very weapons turned against them. For while they served God, kings served ambition, and in the game of crowns, even the holiest warriors could not escape the blade of envy. The Holy Land had fallen. After 2 centuries of crusades, the last Christian outpost, Acre, collapsed in 1291. The surviving Templars retreated to Cyprus, still armored, still vigilant, still believing they would one day reclaim Jerusalem. But Europe was changing. The age of faith was giving way to an age of power. Kings no longer needed warrior monks, they needed treasuries. And no treasury was richer, no organization more independent than the Knights Templar. What began as a holy brotherhood of 9 men had become a financial empire, rivaling monarchs themselves. They owned ships, castles, farmlands, and trade routes that stretched across Christendom. They had invented early banking systems, letters of credit, safe deposits, and long-distance transfers. In the process, they had created something the medieval world had never seen before, an army that answered to no crown. It was only a matter of time before the kings of men turned their eyes toward the temple. The most dangerous among them was Philip IV of France, known as Philip the Fair, a man of beauty and pride, but also of debt and fear. He owed the Templars vast sums of money loans that had kept his wars and his crown alive. But kings do not repay their debts. They erase them. And so, Philip sought not to honor the temple, but to destroy it. To do so, he needed more than soldiers, he needed lies dressed as truth. The Templars had always inspired awe, but also suspicion. Their secrecy, their strange rituals, their vows that excluded the outside world, these fed myths. In taverns and courts, whispers grew that the Templars worshipped idols, that they renounced Christ, that they practiced forbidden rites. None of it was true. But in an age where ignorance was power, rumor was deadlier than any sword. Philip seized upon it. He crafted accusations so vile they could only be answered in silence. Heresy, blasphemy, sodomy, devil worship, words sharpened into weapons. On Friday, October 13, 1307, before dawn, Philip's agents struck. Across France, the Templars were arrested simultaneously, thousands of knights, sergeants, and priests, seized in a single day. The temple, which had withstood the armies of Islam for centuries, was undone by the hand of a Christian king. The charges were fabricated, but the torture was real. In dark dungeons, inquisitors forced confessions with fire and iron. Broken men admitted to anything to end the agony. The church, once their greatest ally, now turned its face away in fear of royal wrath. The once proud order that had conquered the Holy Land now stood accused of betraying God himself. Yet, even in chains, their courage did not falter. Grand Master Jacques de Maul, an old man by then, refused to confess to falsehood. He had fought alongside kings and princes, had seen the holy banners rise and fall in. Now he stood on the banks of the Seine, condemned by the very world he had sworn to defend. When the flames rose around him in 1314, witnesses said he did not scream. He called upon heaven, proclaiming his innocence, and cursed both Pope Clement V and King Philip to face divine judgment within a year. History would say both men did. The fire consumed his body, but not the legend. The ashes of Jacques de Maul carried something the kings could not burn, the unbroken spirit of the temple. What made the Knights Templar so much better at fighting was never merely their weapons, it was their mindset, their structure, their belief that war could be sacred if fought for justice and discipline. Even as they perished, their methods outlived them. Monarchies adopted their logistical systems. Armies copied their command hierarchies. Their code of brotherhood became the blueprint for future orders. The Hospitors, the Teutonic Knights, and even the modern military corps. The Templar ideal, obedience without ego, unity without corruption, became immortal. But their disappearance only deepened their mystery. Across Europe, the legend of the Lost Templars grew like shadowed fire. People whispered that they had escaped with their treasures, sailing to Scotland or beyond. Others claimed they found refuge in secret brotherhoods that continued their work under new symbols. Myths spread of hidden vaults, sacred relics, and a treasure guarded through centuries. Whether truth or fiction, one thing was certain: no other order had ever commanded such respect, even in death. Yet behind the myths lay a simple truth. What made the Knights Templar exceptional was not their gold or their secrets, but their discipline. Their faith turned men into machines of purpose. Their obedience made them incorruptible. Their brotherhood made them unstoppable. They were not perfect, they were human, but they achieved something no king, number army, no empire could. They united war and worship into a single, terrifying art form. The kings who destroyed them feared not their swords. But their example for the Templars had proven that loyalty could exist without greed, that power could thrive without corruption. In destroying them, the rulers of Europe revealed their own weakness. The flames that consumed the temple burned away more than a brotherhood. They burned the illusion of honor that crowned men in velvet and gold. And so, the question remains: why were the Knights Templar so much better at fighting? Because they fought not for life, but for meaning. Because they mastered not only the sword, but the soul that wields it. Because their strength came not from hatred, but from belief. Every soldier fears death. The Templar welcomed it. Their legacy echoes in every disciplined army that rose after them, in every soldier who fights not for greed, but for cause, in every code that demands order before chaos. Though centuries have passed, the Templars' way of war still whispers through time, reminder that the greatest weapon a man can wield is conviction. Today, ruins of their castles still stand, stone bones of an age when faith and steel walked hand in hand. Their crosses are carved on forgotten walls, their symbols etched on ancient maps. The red cross on white still burns in the imagination of humankind, not as a mark of power, but of purity in purpose. Their enemies may have won the war of politics, but the Templars won the war of memory. They remain unforgotten, eternal warriors in the shadow of history, neither saints nor sinners, but something beyond both. When their Grand Master died, the legend says the flames did not end him, they only made the red cross glow brighter in the night. And perhaps, somewhere in the silence of old stone ruins, you can still hear the echo of hooves, the clang of swords, and the whisper of prayer carried on the wind. Non nobis Domini, non nobis, sed in nomine tu, da gloriam. Not unto us, O Lord, but unto thy name give glory. Channel subscribe line, YouTube outro. If you've been captivated by the rise and fall of the Knights Templar, make sure to subscribe for more forgotten chapters of history, stories of power, betrayal, and the warriors who defied time itself.